Hello everyone, my name is David and other group members are Ajay, Halima, Manoj and Vincent. We are here today to present you about a study on emerging security attacks in Android mobile platform. Please feel free to pause the video at any time if it's too fast. According to CVE details presented by Statista, Android had the most vulnerabilities of any operating systems in 2016, triple the number of iOS, and is still believed to be the most vulnerable operating system nowadays. There is no doubt that it has brought us loads of benefits and features. However, it also brings us some drawbacks, such as security flaws that provide opportunities for cyber criminals making their way to target Android platforms as their main point of attacks. Checkpoint research also point out that phishing was one of the most common attack and occupied over 50% alone of device network attack type. The aim of this research is to analyze current emerging security attack on Android mobile platforms, how it works, and how to prevent it. 5 different types of attack are deeply researched and presented. Our research objectives are as follows. First is to provide a better understanding of each type of mobile security attack, present a detailed information of how the attack works, demonstration a case study, deliver some consequences of the attacks, and provide countermeasures and precaution steps to provide users awareness.
Greetings everyone, I'm Ajay and I'm going to be talking about the Dirty Cow exploit as an emerging security threat on Android. So you can see the CV designation is 2016-5195 Linux root exploit. So we know that in recent years, because of the advancement of mobile phone technology, there have been a number of attacks discovered and exploited almost every day on multiple platforms. We're going to be focusing on the privilege escalation attack because the Dirty Cow attack is a subset of this kind of attack where it seeks to exploit a bug, design flaw, configuration oversight in operating system or software application to gain access to critical resources. No operating system is fully immune to this, as you've seen in iOS with the jailbreak attack and on Android with the rooting feature. We know that Android runs on Linux operating system, so any operating system vulnerability that is found on Linux is immediately transferable to the higher levels and it affects Androids and all other distros of Linux. So we know that the Dirty Cow attack is a variation of this privilege escalation attack, which is a race condition attack which exploits the copy and write feature to write to a read-only memory mapping. So let's take a look at the background information. So explaining more about the race condition, what happens in a race condition? It's a vulnerability which manipulates the time between enforcing a security control and using services in a Unix-like system. For example, if you want to write, you're not allowed to write to any location memory. The kernel gives you a specific location and you're only able to write to that location memory. But this can be exploited. So how does a race condition occur? It occurs due to a sequence condition imposed by untrusted processes or a locking failure condition imposed by secure programs such as the operating systems. So what are the components of a race condition? It involves having multiple threads and a critical section of code to be accessed. So as you can see below in this image, there are two applications which have spawned threads. Essentially, a thread is a snippet of code which is executed by an application to run multiple tasks in parallel. So what happens in these three threads, 3, 2, 1, it has access to this critical section as well as these threads by this other application. So what happens is that if these threads write to this critical section and this one reads from it, what could happen in the read and write operation if care is not taken to properly lock and unlock the critical section for the reading and writing operations, a race condition vulnerability can occur. So what is anatomy of a race condition? We know that a shared resource has to be present as well as the threads. We can look at the task 1 and task 2 example below here. We have the correct behavior and incorrect behavior. So we here what happens is task 1 it reads and then it writes and then task 2 gets the updated value from task 1. That's ideally what should happen. But what could happen is that task 1 and task 2 both initiate the reading operation one after another, and task 2 could finish before task 1. So as you can see, we have the update from task 2 gets overwritten by task 1. We don't want that to happen. And a mechanism which could resolve this is ensuring that the applications have the proper privileges to be able to prevent this interference. But this also has a workaround, which is what the dirty cover exploit works with. So let's see how the dirty cover attack works. So this is a demonstration. So consider a C program which does not have direct access to physical memory. It has to make a request to the kernel to be able to essentially spawn its own section in virtual memory to be able to write to it. And what happens over here is, let's consider the mmap system call. And what this does is it has a flag called map private, which creates a private page essentially for a child process. So as you can see, it creates a dirty page over here. These are three important steps to observe. The kernel makes a private copy of the mapped memory. As you can see over here, it updates the page table to point to that memory, and it writes to this memory. So how could a race condition happen over here? Let's take a look. These steps are non-atomic in nature, which means that they can be interrupted, and a system call which can interrupt them is called madvice. And in this system call, what happens is that if the write condition is running on one thread and the madvice thread is running on another thread, if these two threads race against each other, what happens is that if the madvice thread is run before the write thread, it could effectively make the page table point back to the physical memory, and then the write condition could happen. And what happens is that the write condition would effectively write to a read-only memory, which should not be happening. And so as I mentioned, two threads race against each other, and because they're non-atomic in nature, one of these steps it's going to occur, and this manifests as the dirty cow vulnerability. As you can see in this file, we've reading it, we can see that this is a bit of the content that we want to change. This is the payload. So as after running the two threads in parallel, we can see that this bit in memory has been changed, and the user program has indeed modified a read-only root file, which should not be happening. So the vulnerability worked over here. So let's take a look at a case study and scenario where this was found in the wild. This is known as the ZNIU Android malware, and it is a first malware family, so to speak, which found and exploited the dirty code vulnerability. It is found in more than 40 countries, and there are many, like 5,000 users affected approximately. So something to be noted is that it works only on the 64-bit architecture with the ARM architecture. And essentially what happens is that the attacker, they inject a malware through an app, through a malicious app, and this app essentially creates a remote connection with their CNC center, or like their control center, and from their control center they're able to control the dirty cow exploit to run on the Android device and exploit any features on the Android device. So as we can see below here, in this image, what happens is that the attackers, they communicated with the payment service of the attacker's mobile telephone, and they were able to use dirty cow exploit to access the SMS feature. The SMS feature is only available to privileged applications on the Android OS. So using dirty cow exploit, it makes sense that the SMS would work with the dirty cow exploit, and they were able to spoof themselves as the device owner and essentially profit from the device owner paying their bill to their phone operators. So as you can see, this is the image, approximately 20 RMB or 3 USD monthly. So this is the logic of it. It essentially corrected the model of the device, what device it was, fetch appropriate rootkits from the remote server, one of them being the dirty cow exploit, decrypts the exploit, triggers it one by one, checks the result and removes the exploit files to remove any traces, and reports if the exploit succeeded or failed. As we can see in the network traffic that has been captured, we can see that these are the payloads. With the post request and the get request. So what does this rootkit do? It arbitrarily writes to this virtually dynamically linked share object, which essentially has no limit on the SELinux. So what is SELinux? SELinux is essentially a Linux kernel module which monitors access to the security policies. And essentially what it does is it patches the Linux CDNX policy to disarm restrictions and plant a backdoor root shell. As you can see in the code below, very similar to the Dirty Cow exploit, it has the writing system call and the imidY system call. These two are run in an infinite loop simultaneously, and what happens is the Dirty Cow exploit manifests as a result. So what are the consequences? More than 300,000 apps that carry the malware are found in the wild. 140,000 of those possessing unique labels. Trend Micro, the researchers also found that some names are obfuscated to prevent detection. It was found more than 40 countries, 5,000 devices. And it was found that anyone running Android versions 5.1 or earlier were susceptible. Even phones running later versions too. According to figures provided by Google, that would have left at least half of the devices at the time being vulnerable, which is an innumerable number. So what are the countermeasures? The user should only install apps from the Google Play Store or other trusted third-party app stores. They should use like endpoint detection systems such as Trend Micro Mobile Security. They should install antiviruses. However, it should be noticed that an antivirus system may be able to detect it, but they cannot do anything about stopping the vulnerability, because the Dirty Cow exploit happens on a much lower level than the antivirus software being on the application level. Essentially, the bottom line is that the Dirty Cow exploit has no preventative workaround, with the only cure being a patch and running a newer version, and essentially updating Linux or Android to a newer version where the patch does not hold anymore, and the exploit is cannot be run. So as you can see, the Linus Torvald, he acknowledged that it was an old vulnerability that had to be fixed many years ago. Thankfully, it has been fixed, so our devices are safe from this. But it still stands that this was a very malicious attack, and it had a fair amount of damage done for the Android platform. But yeah, I'll now pass it on to Halima to talk about the spyware vulnerability. Thank you.
Hello everyone, I am Halima and I will talk about spyware attack. The fast growth of intelligent gadgets and mobile applications has resulted in constant influx of new security threats. Android is a prime target for malicious apps that aim to exploit security flaws in the system. Mobile devices enable a further invasion of privacy with video capabilities which allow for surveillance of people. Although user technical knowledge may be unsuitable to stop such assaults, learning about them might help prevent them. Spyware is malicious software designed to gather information about its target user. The number of apps available through Google Play Store continues to rise, making it more difficult to check whether or not these programs have the proper rights. In 2014, there were 3.25 times as many financial cyber attacks on Android users as in 2013. Using the client that interacts with the system, applications could also downloaded and installed into the system. The number of spyware attacks carried out against Android mobile devices has skyrocketed during the previous 2 years. According to data compiled by Norton, spyware and Trojans are responsible for 37% of all global cybercrimes. Spyware is one of the most common online threats businesses and individuals face today because it can steal and damage vital data. Personal information is collected and sent to advertising, data businesses, or other external users through spyware. There are several channels via which spyware may spread and works. Ads, pop-up windows in browsers, and sponsored links on websites are just some of the places you could see such a connections. The only moment you need to interact with a malicious link is when you click on it. Spyware can also be spread by the simple act of opening a malicious file. Malicious software can take the form of seemingly legal apps, or it might disguise itself as a legal one. Sometimes erasing the program from your computer won't get rid of, of the spyware, which will then keep spying on you even after you've deleted the program. Apps that aren't available through the official Google Play stores should raise this extra suspicion from users. Israeli IT company NSO Group Technologies is famous for its patented spyware called Pegasus, which can monitor Android smartphones remotely with single click. NSO Group software may discreetly record video and audio and copy and paste text communications. Once it has insidiously infiltrated your phone, it may be used to spy on you round the clock. It may steal your images, record your calls, and replicate your outgoing and incoming text. The information it contains may reveal your current location, past travels, and people you have come into contact with. Companies like NSO find it highly appealing to utilize Pegasus to target a large number of mobile phones. Consequences: spyware can cause a significant damage to your computer if it captures data that can be exploited to steal people's identities. In the worst case scenario, affected devices may experience decreases performance and lag while opening new applications or browsing the web. Spyware may also take your banking information and utilize it for a legal purpose if you use online banking. Spyware may hijack your browser's search results and force you to visit fake or harmful websites. It may also alter your homepage and other browser preferences. By capturing the user's keystrokes, keyloggers may collect sensitive information. In addition to more typical data, threat actors can use them to steal credentials, credit card numbers, and other PII. There is a possibility that the built-in security features of your browser will not provide suitable protection against spyware. That doesn't prevent the possibility that you can still take measures to safeguard yourself. The primary objective is to protect you from potential threats by instructing your web browser to prevent all potentially harmful pop-up windows, websites, and plugins. Stop clicking on pop-ups and emails and stop downloading apps that make promises that are too good to be true. Be extremely cautious if you get an email from an unidentified sender directing you to click on a link in the message. Never download applications that haven't been obtained from reputable sources. Be sure to upgrade your system and the browser as soon as an improved version becomes available. Thank you for watching.
Thanks, Halima. Next, I'll be talking about man-in-the-middle attack. So, what is man-in-the-middle attack? According to NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology publication, man-in-the-middle attack is a form of attack in which the attackers are positioned in the middle of two communicating parties, for example, between users and user or between user and server, to intercept and or alter communicated data transferred over the channel. To make it easier to understand, man-in-the-middle attack simply is an action of listening or intercepting network traffic to gain access to data flow between two parties and obtain confidential information such as login credentials, bank account details, credit card numbers, and login passwords. According to a statistic presented by Statista, revenue of mobile application is skyrocketed and is still expecting to grow significantly higher in the next few years. Therefore, man-in-the-middle attack for mobile devices, or in other words, attacking API channel between mobile applications and the backend server, is an ongoing security threat for mobile users and is nowhere to be ended anytime soon in the near future. There are several types of man-in-the-middle attack techniques, such as IP spoofing, DNS spoofing or cache poisoning, HTTP spoofing, SSL hijacking and stripping, email hijacking and phishing, Wi-Fi eavesdropping, and session hijacking or stealing browser cookies. However, in this presentation, we will mainly focus on HTTP spoofing only due to time limitation. For other types of attack techniques, please see our detailed report. HTTP spoofing is an attack in which an attacker uses domain that looks very similar to the targeted website and replace some characters with non-ASCII characters that only similar in appearance to trick users into giving away their personal information to perpetrators or malicious actors. To make this more authentic and secure looking, attackers normally would register their domain names that is similar to the target website and its secure socket layer certificate. Consequences of man-in-the-middle attack includes gaining access to personal information or sensitive data, obtaining login credentials through unsecure public network to gain unauthorized access to other users' account, stealing credit card numbers to perform unauthorized online purchase, and redirecting traffic from legitimate website to sites hosting malware or to attackers' website for information gathering for future attack. A few warning signs that users should be aware of as they may be at the risk of man-in-the-middle attack include open or public Wi-Fi network connections, suspicious SSIDs, in other words, it's a Wi-Fi network names that do not look right, or duplicate networks with similar names in the same location. There are a few activities to look out for that can help send the red flag for the man-in-the-middle attack, such as the URLs starting with HTTP instead of HTTPS, strange addresses or characters in application URL, unexpected delay in loading pages or application, repeated disconnections or interruptions, pop-up pages asking for login credentials, fake software update pop-ups, and also certificate errors message. There are several ways that the user can do to prevent man-in-the-middle attack. Those include, but not limited to, the following, such as strong encryptions on access point, stronger router login credentials using VPNs, HTTPS connection only, strong authentication protocol, end-to-end encryption, runtime application self-protection, multi-factor authentication, latest operating system versions or updates, and also users awareness. Now, let's look at a case study of man-in-the-middle attack in action. This scenario is based on Android Studio and Android emulator to run an application, and another tool called man-in-the-middle proxy server to intercept HTTP request traffic from the application. So firstly, we started the Android mobile emulator and installed the ShipFast application. Once it's ready, we launch the application and log in using any of the login methods available. Then we allow the application to access device location. Next, we toggle I'm available and proceed to next step. Finally, we reach the final screen without any issue. This is because it's a normal process of the application. Now we will use man-in-the-middle proxy to intercept traffic for man-in-the-middle attack. It is listening to port 8080 of the IP address of the network. This time we relaunch the application, but in a writable mode with proxy set to IP address on port 8080 for demonstration. After the device rebooted, we interacted with the application same as before, without noticing any error message or anything else. But on the other hand, malicious actor or attacker can see the requests being made to the API backend as shown in figure G. Then we select one of those requests to further analyze in full detail. It showed a very detailed information including authorization token, API key, and other valuable information as shown in figure H and I that can be used for targeted attack or future attack. This is the end of man-in-the-middle attack. Next, I will hand over to Manoj to talk about phishing attack.
Hello everyone, my name is Manas Nitu and I'm going to talk about phishing attack. What is phishing? Phishing attackers use human psychology to design phishing messages in such a way that looks genuine and believable. Use the legitimate company's logo and branding or contact victims as a person they know via email, phone call, text messages, or social media and steal their private information or sensitive personal data, such as credit card number, residential address, mobile number, etc. Using a malicious link, infected attachments, fake websites, or installing malware. Example of phishing attacks. Nowadays, mobile password managers are very popular, and we see a range of apps offering simplicity to users to store and use their credential at once. However, research suggests that there are growing concern about the weaker design models, such password managers apps, which have already contributed to growing number of phishing attacks on Android devices. These apps identify domain name of user, initiated website, and then use autofill option to enter password on behalf of the designated mobile users. However, as phishing attackers are increasingly becoming smarter, they create similar sounding fake website with no associated mobile app for that particular website, and poorly designed password managers fail to detect between malicious Unicode characters or domain name and the legitimate website. So that as a result, phishing attackers trick such mobile password managers to disclose user passwords or credentials to their infected apps or websites. Now, how phishing attacks work? In phishing attacks, attackers impersonate themselves as sender from legitimate business organization or the persons they know. Then ask recipient to click on malicious links, infected attachment, redirect to fake website, or install. Attackers use email, text messages, phone calls, or social media accounts and lure victim to provide sensitive private information such as username, password, or credit card number. As soon as victims fall into the attacker's traps and tricks, attackers use victim-sensitive and confidential personal details to carry out fraudulent or criminal activities. Now, common types of phishing attacks. Spoofing, attackers use names of individuals or organizations that are similar sounding name to the actual entities, missing or replacing one or few letters and numbers, and redirect the traffic to malicious website or servers which are also built as a replica of the legitimate organizations. Spear phishing, this type of attacker increasingly becoming common where attackers launch targeted attacks on certain organizations at first. Attackers pretend to be trusted and well-known senders to the receivers and ask them to provide either private information, click a malicious link, or download an infected attachment that may seem lucrative or relevant to the victim. Spam filter, bypassing or blocking. This is often considered as sophisticated phishing attacks, as attackers use fake IP address, session cookies, etc. to manipulate and bypass spam filters and related security measures. Consequence of phishing attacks. Identify theft. There are 4 key consequences of phishing attacks. One is identity theft. In industries like healthcare holds a wealth of personal data such as name, address, bank details, and medical history, and criminals can take a loan or commit a crime by impersonating as victim. Financial loss. The US intelligence agency FBI reported an alarming loss of 2.3 billion US dollars, resulting from business email scams between October 2013 and February 2016. Reputational damage. Cyber attacks like phishing would not only cause a short-term damage to the reputation of an organization, but a long-term consequence on customers' confidence when providing personal data. Operation disruption for business. Typically, when a successful phishing attack is launched, IT department in general spend a lot of work to remediate the data breach on an urgent basis, and therefore the regular business activities are hampered. Now, the countermeasure of phishing attacks. Cybersecurity awareness. In the recent times, cybersecurity education is really important as we need to educate internet users about suspicious links. Check and verify senders before clicking on a link or downloading an attachment, and not sharing personal information on social media platforms. Technical measures, we can deploy a range of cybersecurity measures which will help to increase the security of the systems and enhance the technical ability to fight phishing attacks. We can increase the security layer of our system using spam filters, backlisting suspicious URL or DNS, and checking the security license of website. Business measures, at organization level, IT team can enforce IT policies along with cyber education awareness because one single measure is never enough to combat phishing attacks. IT policy can look at a range of measures such as not to click or download unwanted content and not to share personal information without checking the legitimacy of the site. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Mahajni, for your informative presentation about phishing. My name is Vincent, and today I will be discussing about SQL injection attacks. Firstly, let's talk about what an SQL attack is. It was firstly documented in 1998 by cybersecurity researcher and hacker Jeff Forstall. This researcher showed the simplicity of such attacks, explaining how anyone with basic coding skills could piggyback unauthorized SQL commands into legitimate ones, and then pull sensitive information out of the database of an unsecured website. It is an attack that takes advantage of vulnerabilities between SQL databases and the queries from the website application, allowing the attacker to gain access to data not normally allowed from their clearance. The name is called SQL injection because the attacker would insert or inject an SQL query into data plane input to effect the execution of predefined SQL commands. Once access to the database has been acquired, attackers can add, modify, and even delete records from the database, causing a permanent loss of data or even persistent change in the records. There are three different major types of SQL attacks, with each having branches characterized by those major types of attacks. Inbound SQL, or more commonly known as classic, is one of the most common types of SQL attacks due to its simplicity and efficiency. The term inbound is named after the attacker using the same channels of communication to launch the attack. Error-based SQL injection is a type of inbound, which would rely on error outputs to obtain information on the back-end structure. With the error reply from the injection, the attacker could be able to gauge a better understanding of the structured server and proceed with other targeted attacks. Union-based SQL, just like error-based SQL, is a type of inbound SQL. However, where it would differ would be the type of output. Union-based SQL takes advantage of the union SQL operator by combining multiple select statements, which would return a HTTP response. Inferral SQL injection, unlike inbound SQL, may take longer for an attacker to exploit, however just as effective as any other SQL injection. It is also known as blind SQL injection because the data is not viewable. Instead, the attacker would observe the application's behavior and enumerate from it. Boolean-based blind SQL attack is a subtype of blind SQL injection, where the attacker would observe the database server and application by inputting true and false results. That is why it's called Boolean, with only true and false being its value used in its attack. With a mix of Boolean operators with the harmful statements used by the attacker, they would observe the HTTP response and see if any changes were made by either a true or false reply from the database. Time-based blind SQL injection is a type of blind SQL attack where it relies on pausing the database for calculated time in the query. It does not return a message, however resolves around the observation towards the behavior of the database server and the application. The attacker can distinguish the time it takes to respond from the server, whether it is true or false. Out-of-band SQL is the last major type of SQL attack, with channels that are used in band are out of access. The techniques will exfoliate data through different channels such as DNS queries or using HTTP requests. This requires a prerequisite of application server to allow commands that trigger DNS or HTTP requests. There have been multiple SQL injection attacks targeting many large websites, business, and social media platforms. Attacks such as the Ghost Shell attack targeting 53 universities using SQL injection, stealing and publishing 36,000 public records belonging to students, faculty, and staff has been seen in the past. Some consequences of SQL injections are attackers gaining access towards users' data, which they could be able to freely sell or impersonate. Attackers gaining access to essential information stored in the database server. Attackers altering data or adding data to the server, confusing users or administrators into what changes are legitimate or not. Attackers giving access to fellow offenders into the backend system. Attackers could permanently delete records on the server, causing unrecoverable loss of data. Attackers can access database servers with operating system privileges and use these permissions to access other sensitive systems. There are many more consequences, however, I have labeled the main ones above. SQL injection attacks are different from most other cyber threats, with most faults not originating from the end user, but from the institution or vendor. There are little to none social engineering vulnerabilities, therefore less human error will be included into the equation for the total vulnerabilities needed to be minded. The first step in preventing any SQL attacks is acknowledging that any system can be hacked, and you can only deter attacks but not fully prevent them. Secondly is locating where vulnerabilities are weakest, with many detection tools available. I've given 3 examples of methods individuals could use to prevent or deter any attacks from using SQL injection attacks. Firstly is enforcing prepared statements. Prepared statements are pre-compiled SQL commands created inside a program that can be used many times over the course of the application's lifestyle. These will define all SQL code between user input and codes for your SQL database. This will prevent various attacks as they involve trying to input their malicious code into the form of the communication given. Another method is using stored procedures. This method is similar to prepared statement as it also requires binding variables and minimizing attacks from the form of communication given to the users. Stored procedures requires the developer to build an SQL statements and then store them into the database. The difference between prepared statements and stored procedures is the SQL for stored procedures is defined and then stored into the database itself and then called from the application when being used. Validating user inputs is the third method that is a chain of methods that whitelist all valid SQL statements used in the database, leaving all unvalidated statements banned and blocked from causing effects. This process is known as input validation and requires considerable knowledge of the weakness of your database and known attacks available. An example of this is filtering out all special characters except for the @ symbol, @ for emails, and a certain number of numbers allowed when inputting a phone number and no letters. So let's look at a case study that I have done for basic web pages on a mobile device. So I'm showing you a demonstration of a simplistic website that has no protection against SQL attacks and the consequences it will have. So as you can see on figure A, we can see the simplistic website as it looks like a normal login screen from a bank with an email and password user input. You can try login with an invalid email and password, as you can see in figure B, when it would return an unknown email or password. However, let's try use a special character in the password box. So we can see this in figure C, that an error message will return, which shows an SQL syntax error. So from figure C, we can indicate that there is a vulnerability in the SQL server and the character has confused the database. This is an example of an error-based SQL attack, and from the error, we can make an inference of the application code in the backend as seen in figure D. When we use the apostrophe syntax in the password box, we can understand why the error was thrown out and the reasoning. We can use this to our advantage by entering what can be seen in figure F. Between the equal sign and limit 1, by using the apostrophe, we can bypass the location where the password would be located and input our malicious code. By replacing limit 1 with our own inputted malicious code's true statement, in this case 1 equals 1, this would bypass the requirement for password and allow us access to the application. Thank you for listening.
In conclusion, to sum up our presentation, Dirty Cow attack is a variation of privilege escalation. Spyware is a malicious software designed to gather information from target user. Man-in-the-middle attack is a form of attack to intercept and alter network traffic between two parties. Phishing is a type of scam in which attackers disguised ask from a trusted source to steal confidential information. And lastly, SQL injection is an injection of code trying to destroy the database. Through a deep analysis of these few security attacks on Android mobile platform, it is clear that these threats are nowhere to come to an end anytime soon. Therefore, all users, especially Android mobile users, should be very precautious and take great precaution steps to prevent and protect themselves from being a victim of such type of attacks. This is the end of our presentation. Thank you for watching.